I wrote a book in 2018, and the title of the book is Living on the Precipice. And it has the subtitle Global Corruption, the Supremacy of Fake, and Reflections on Near Term Extinction. The Essential Internet Postings, 1996 to 2018, includes the best of the Meditopia and Ashwin files. These are all things that I've written over the years that have been posted on the internet. Next to the things that I have to say about the fakery of conventional cancer therapies, that people can actually be talked into this stuff. The thing that people have written me the most about, to comment about, is things in this book or things in the articles I've written online that have to do with the subject of NTE, Near Term Extinction, something that's been an idea that's been promoted by Professor Guy McPherson. He's got a website called Nature Bats Last. You can go to it at guymcpherson.com. This book's 30 chapters long, and I only devote the first 3 chapters of this book to the subject of near-term extinction, but you'd be surprised how many people have written me about it. Most people regard any discussion of end times as a religious discussion. They want to relegate it to eschatology or errant ecological theoreticians who are out of step with the common narrative, or maybe psychologically maladjusted demagogues who attract people who just can't get enough doom porn. I don't see the topic of end times as having anything to do with any of that. There's an obviousness all around us of what's happening that transcends categorization. And ultimately, I don't know of anything that's more important to talk about. That's why I also wrote The Gospel of 2012 According to Ayahuasca, which was work that I did in late 2011 all the way to the summer of 2012, and then I published what my work as a psychonaut had uncovered. But if I'm going to talk about it, I have to provide some background to give the entire subject context. You won't appreciate my discoveries unless you hear the entire story. From the time I was a small boy, I had the realization that I was living at the end of an era, that if I were a character in a book about the history of humanity, you could find me in the last paragraph of the last chapter on the last page of the book. And I had this realization not simply because of my relationship with my mother, who was a phenomenal psychic. And I give examples of this in my book, The Gospel of 2012. I had this realization because I sensed that everything about society around me worked at cross purposes to Mother Nature, from which civilization arose. It was as if nature had birthed the genetic mutations so ugly, grotesque, and dysfunctional that you just knew that you were eventually looking at imminent death. This realization was enforced by watching simple things that occurred around me that other people seemed to miss, or they didn't grasp the implications of what they were observing. For instance, it didn't make sense to me as a toddler that I had to be potty trained. No other animal needed to be instructed when or how to shit or piss. They just knew instinctively how to do this. There were no other animals running to the store to buy toilet paper, so they would have something to wipe their ass. Cats and dogs were allowed to sit on beds and furniture, and they were considered clean enough to do that without ever using a bathroom. They didn't use implements to eat. Animals mated in the street. Nobody ever had to instruct them how or when or why to do that. Females had offspring without going to the hospital or having any assistance. Animals could find shelter they were perfectly content with without building complex structures. They communicated to their own satisfaction without language. They needed no alphabet, no education, no specialized instruction, no laws, no regulations, no religion, no philosophies, no police, no government, no books, no libraries, no doctors, no dentists, no lawyers, no clothes, no fashions, no jewelry, no makeup, no appliances, no specialized tools, no vehicles. In fact, they seemed content to stay within their locality. They could even be territorial about it. There was nothing about them that was artificially contrived. I know I'm sounding insane, but take into account that I was only 5 years old. So right there I sensed that modern people were out of step somehow with the rest of nature. For my birthday, when I turned 4 years old, my grandfather bought me a set of toy soldiers. They were all colored green, and many of them were holding guns. I sensed that these guns were used to shoot and kill other people. In 1962, they began airing a popular TV show called Combat. It was a series about events in World War II, which my father, a former U.S. Army veteran himself, watched religiously. I found it strange that among all animals, only humans found the need to engage in large-scale wars to kill off others of their own kind. I never heard of any animals doing that. But the biggest thing I noticed as a child was the degree to which people were unconscious. As a child, I saw everything around me as having, in varying degrees, conscious awareness. Not just plants, not just animals, but plants, trees, rocks, things that everyone else regarded as unconscious. I once asked my mother when did I start talking, and she replied, "Oh, about 9 years old. Your first word was lights, although you pronounced it yites." And I said, "No, Mother. When was the first time I ever said a full sentence or a full complete thought?" And she replied, "Well, let me think. You were a late talker. You didn't really start talking until you were 3 years old." This got my attention because, for reasons I can't explain, I have perfect recollection going back to my 3rd birthday. How do I know this? Because all these family events occurred in the year 1959 when I was 3, for which I have a perfect memory. My mother continued, "You spoke your first sentence when you were 3, and it was when I was pruning some rose bushes." Now right away I knew what she was referring to. In those days when my mother was scolding me, she would often say, "You know better than that." Well, when I saw my mother pruning the rose bushes, I sensed that it was painful to the plant. So I walked up to her and I said, "Mommy, you know better than that." I was too young to know that pruning is often necessary with fruit trees, rose bushes, and other plants in order to keep them healthy. All I could sense was that the rose bushes found what my mother was doing to be painful to them, and they didn't like it. So I told my mother, "I remember when I told you that, and I remember exactly where we were when I said it. I remember everything about that rose bush you were pruning. And I remember everything about that moment to this very day." In those days, little boys in the States were often given toy trucks. I had a blue Tonka truck. One day, one of the wheels on the truck broke. And it wasn't long after that that I wasn't able to find that toy anymore. So acting on intuition, I went out to the trash can out on the curb next to the street because that day was trash day. I found my truck in the trash can and I took it back into the house and I confronted my mother. "Why did you do it? Why did you throw out my truck? You had no right to do that." And my mother explained, "Your truck is broken. Stop crying. It's okay. We'll buy you a new one." And I said, "I don't want another truck. It's not its fault. Would you throw me out if I had something broken? My truck doesn't deserve to be thrown out. It didn't do anything wrong. I want to play with it even if you think it's broken. If you want to spank me for breaking the truck, fine, but don't take it out on my truck." My mother broke down and started crying. But I did get to keep the truck, for a while anyway. Another way I knew I was different was in my attitude toward money. It seemed more important to other people than it did to me. In October 1961, I was a kindergartner at Roscoe Elementary in Sun Valley, California. We lived on Satsuma Street. It was just a block away from the school. They had this Halloween party for the kids. Big event. Everybody in the school was involved and all the kids came out in costumes. I came as an elephant. I had my elephant mask with a suit with all these elephant markings on it. So they had this machine with all these buttons on it. And you push different buttons to get this play money they would use to go on rides, go to the haunted house, and do other things related to the party. When you press some of the buttons, you got a loud ding, and you didn't get any money. You had to press a couple of buttons to figure out the patterns on the buttons. Which ones you pressed that gave you money and no sound, and which ones you pressed where you only got a ding but no money. My father, who was standing over me, could see that I wasn't getting much play money, and he kept trying to tell me which buttons I should be pushing. After I had exhausted my allotted turns, my father could see that I didn't have much money. So why did you press the wrong buttons? You knew better. And I replied, Dad, I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to hear the dings. I'm beginning to discuss with you about end times with things that seem to have nothing to do with the subject, but the truth is they have everything to do with it, because it is only conscious awareness that can allow a person to see what's happening right now. Only consciousness. I'll tell you what you came to hear, but you have to know the background first, because it begins with awareness. Awareness of what's going on around us in a world where there is so much unawareness.